Ma'am, we get false tips every hour. Sit down before you embarrass yourself. Officer Ryan Keller did not even stand when he said it. He stayed behind the front desk of the precinct with one hand near his keyboard and the other resting beside a half-empty paper cup of coffee, his voice flat under the buzzing white lights. Grace Miller stood on the other side of the counter at 10:42 at night, rainwater dripping from the ends of her hair onto the cracked tile floor, her hospital jacket soaked through at the shoulders, her chest rising and falling from the run across 2 blocks of wet sidewalk. In her right hand, she held a small purple bracelet, the kind a child might wear because it made her feel brave. Grace opened her palm and pushed it toward him. "That missing girl is still alive," she said, each word trembling not from fear, but from urgency. "I just saw her." The station did not stop, but it changed. A printer kept clicking near the records room. A radio crackled behind a glass partition. A man waiting on a bench looked up from his phone and gave a small laugh, like he had already decided Grace was another late-night problem. Keller looked at her from her wet sneakers to the old Mercy General Hospital badge clipped crookedly to her coat, then back to her face. He did not look at the bracelet. Not really. Stay with this story, because in just a few minutes, the same officer who brushed this black woman aside would watch a detective freeze at the sight of what she carried, and by then, every second he wasted would feel heavier than his badge. And if you believe stories about justice, dignity, and the people no one listens to deserve to be heard, subscribe now, because what happens inside this station will remind you that the truth often arrives wearing ordinary clothes. Grace leaned closer to the counter, careful to keep her voice low even though everything inside her wanted to break open. Her name is Maddie Collins. She is 9 years old. I saw her in a white van near East River Storage. Bay 17. The left tail light was broken. Keller's eyes narrowed, not with concern, but with irritation at how specific she sounded. "You saw a child in a van, at night, in the rain, and now you are sure it is the missing girl from the news." Grace swallowed. Her throat tasted like cold air and hospital coffee. "I was her nurse 3 months ago. She came into Mercy General with a severe asthma attack. I stayed with her until her breathing slowed. She wore this bracelet every day." She placed it on the counter. Purple silicone. Tiny silver charm. 2 engraved words, "Brave girl." Keller finally glanced at it, but only for a second. "That information is for detectives to review. Then call a detective. Detectives are already working the case. Then tell them what I just told you." Keller leaned back in his chair, the movement slow and dismissive. "You do not walk into my station and start giving orders." Behind Grace, rain tapped against the front windows, soft but relentless. The clock above the bulletin board moved from 10:42 to 10:43. 1 minute gone. Grace looked at the bracelet under the hard white light and saw Maddie's small hand wrapped around a nebulizer mask, saw the little girl trying to smile while air fought its way back into her lungs. "Officer," Grace said, her voice quieter now, which somehow made it sharper, "if you wait for perfect paperwork, that child will be gone." Keller's face hardened. He reached for the bracelet, slid it closer to his side of the desk, and pointed toward the plastic chairs along the wall. "Sit down," he said. "We will get to you when we can." Grace did not move right away. She looked past him at the radios, the phones, the doors leading deeper into the station, all the tools that could help Maddie if one person chose to listen. Then she looked back at Keller, and there was no begging in her eyes anymore, only the terrible calm of a woman realizing that the first enemy tonight was not the man in the van. It was the silence of the people who could stop him. Grace sat down because arguing with Keller would only give him a cleaner excuse to ignore her, but every inch of her body resisted the chair. The plastic was cold beneath her rain-soaked coat, and the fluorescent lights above made the waiting area feel less like a place for help and more like a place where time went to die. Water gathered in small dark drops under her sneakers. Her hands folded together in her lap, not because she was calm, but because if she let them move, she might stand up again before she had a plan. Across the room, Officer Keller slid the purple bracelet into a shallow tray beside his keyboard as though it were just another misplaced object from another ordinary complaint. Grace watched him do it, and the gesture hurt more than his words. 3 months earlier, that same bracelet had rested around Maddie Collins's wrist in room 12 of Mercy General Hospital, where the air smelled of antiseptic, warm blankets, and fear parents tried not to show. Grace had been 10 hours into a 12-hour shift when Maddie arrived, wheezing so hard her little shoulders rose with every breath. Her mother, Erin Collins, stood near the doorway with both hands over her mouth, trying not to cry where her daughter could see. Grace remembered kneeling beside the bed, lowering her voice to a whisper, and asking Maddie about the bracelet. The girl had lifted one trembling hand and said, "It says brave girl because my dad used to call me that." Grace had smiled through the tightness in her chest and answered, "Then we are going to let the brave girl breathe slow with me." Maddie had followed her rhythm. In for 2. Out for 4. Again and again until the panic softened and the monitor stopped screaming its warning into the room. Grace had not forgotten her face. Some patients passed through a nurse's life like shadows. Maddie had stayed like a small light. That was why, after leaving Mercy General tonight, after 12 hours of medication rounds, discharge papers, and a hallway crowded with coughing patients, Grace noticed the white van parked near East River Storage instead of driving past it. The rain was coming down hard enough to blur the windshield, but she saw a child's face in the rear side window for one impossible second, pale under the dashboard glow, eyes wide, one hand pressed against the glass. Then the purple bracelet slipped from that hand and landed near the curb as the van rolled forward. Grace had pulled over so fast her tires splashed against the gutter. She picked up the bracelet from a puddle, saw brave girl under the streetlight, and felt the whole night turn cold inside her. Now, sitting in the precinct, she looked at the clock. 10:44, 2 minutes since Keller told her to sit. Maybe 5 since she had entered the building. Maybe 15 since the van turned off East River Avenue. Every minute stretched like a hallway she could not run down. Keller was speaking to a white man in a wool coat who had stepped up to the desk holding a cracked tablet. His tone had changed completely. "Yes, sir, we can take a report for that." Grace stared at him. The man had lost a device. Grace had brought the possible location of a child. Yet Keller typed for him first, nodding, asking careful questions, giving him the patience he had refused her. The comparison was so quiet, so ordinary, that it became unbearable. Grace stood. Keller looked up before she reached the counter. "I told you to wait." Grace placed both palms flat on the desk, leaving wet fingerprints on the dull surface. "And I told you a child is running out of time." The man in the wool coat stepped back, uncomfortable now. Keller's face tightened with the embarrassment of being challenged in front of someone he had decided deserved respect. "Ma'am, sit down." Grace did not raise her voice. East River Storage. Bay 17. White van. Broken left tail light. Purple bracelet with brave girl engraved on it. How many details do you need before you do the job? For 1 second, the radio behind the glass crackled louder than everything else. Keller's eyes went to the bracelet in the tray, then back to Grace. He could have picked up the phone. He could have called the detective unit. He could have sent one patrol car to check the storage lot. Instead, pride settled over his face like a locked door. "Last warning," he said. "Do not disrupt this station." Grace looked at him, soaked, exhausted, and steadier than he expected. "This station is already disrupted," she said. "You just have not realized why." Officer Ryan Keller had worked the front desk long enough to believe he could sort people before they finished their first sentence. 10 years of night shifts had made him efficient, or so he told himself. He knew the difference between a real emergency and panic. He knew the tone of people chasing reward money. He knew who came in with facts and who came in with stories. That was the language he used for it. Experience. Judgment. Procedure. Not once did he call it what it became when he looked at Grace Miller and decided her urgency was noise. To him, she was a black woman in a soaked hospital jacket, eyes tired, hair damp, voice too firm for someone standing on the public side of his desk. She did not arrive with a lawyer. She did not arrive with a news camera. She did not arrive in expensive clothes or with someone important beside her. So Keller made her wait, and waiting became its own kind of refusal. Grace saw all of this from the other side of the counter, and the worst part was how familiar it felt. She had seen doctors dismiss patients who could not explain their pain in the right words. She had seen mothers in emergency rooms repeat symptoms 3 times before anyone looked up. She had watched people learn to make themselves smaller in rooms where help was supposed to be given. But tonight, Grace refused to shrink. "Call Detective Bennett," she said. Keller's hand stopped above the keyboard. "How do you know that name?" "Because her press conference has been playing on every hospital television for 2 days." Keller leaned back, his chair creaking. "Then you also know we have had hundreds of tips. And maybe one of them was real." The man in the wool coat cleared his throat, quietly stepping farther from the counter as if he had walked into a room colder than he expected. Keller lowered his voice, but not his contempt. "Miss Miller, I am going to say this once. You do not get to come in here, dripping water on my floor, and demand detective resources because you think you saw something." Grace looked down at the floor. Tiny rainwater drops spread around her shoes, dark against the tile. His floor. His desk. His station. Even the language told on him. "That child's bracelet is in your tray," she said. "Her location is in my memory. Her time is on that clock. None of those belong to you." The words struck harder because she did not shout them. Somewhere behind the glass partition, a dispatcher's radio mentioned a traffic stop on Monroe Street. A printer spat out another page. The clock moved to 10:46. Keller looked at it despite himself. Grace saw the flicker. For one fragile second, he seemed close to doing the right thing. Then the phone on his desk rang. He answered, listened, and his expression softened into professional concern. "Yes, ma'am, we can send someone to take that report." Grace heard enough to understand, another property complaint, another call being handled before Maddie. She reached for her own phone. Keller saw the motion and pointed at her. "Do not call emergency services from inside the station to bypass me." Grace froze with the phone in her hand. "Bypass you," she repeated. "A little girl might be in a van, and you think the emergency is your authority." Keller stood then, finally, his full height rising behind the desk. His white uniform shirt pulled tight at the shoulders. His badge glinted under the fluorescent light. "Sit down." The room held its breath. Grace felt every eye on her, the wool coatman, the person on the bench, the young officer near the hallway, the dispatcher behind glass. She also felt the small purple bracelet sitting behind Keller's arm, trapped in the wrong man's custody. Her fear became very still. "No," she said. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just enough to make the station hear it. Keller's face hardened. "Excuse me." Grace lifted her chin. "I am done helping you ignore me." Grace's refusal did not echo loudly, but it changed the room more than a shout could have. Officer Keller stared at her as if the word no had no business crossing the counter toward him. His hand rested beside the phone, close enough to call Detective Bennett, close enough to send a car toward East River Storage, close enough to save time he had already wasted. Instead, he looked at the people watching and chose the thing that made him feel in control. "You are going to sit down," he said, "or I will have you removed from the lobby." Grace's eyes moved to the bracelet in the tray. Purple silicone. Silver charm. Brave girl. Small enough to fit in a child's palm, heavy enough now to bend the whole station around it. "Then remove me after you make the call," she said. Keller's face tightened. The young officer near the hallway shifted his weight, uneasy, but did not step forward. The dispatcher behind the glass looked down at her screen too quickly. Everyone in the room seemed to understand that something was wrong, yet no one wanted to be the first to challenge the men behind the desk. Grace had seen that silence before in hospital corridors when a senior doctor missed a symptom and everyone waited for someone else to speak. Silence could look polite. Silence could look professional. Silence could also cost a life. She reached into the pocket of her soaked coat and pulled out a folded receipt from a gas station near East River Avenue. Keller's eyes narrowed. "What is that?" "Time stamp," Grace said, placing it on the counter. "I stopped for gas at 10:18. The storage lot is 3 blocks from there. I saw the van at 10:24. I was here by 10:42. Bay 17. White van. Broken left tail light. Mud on the rear bumper. A sticker on the back window from a delivery company called Ward Logistics." At the name, Keller's expression flickered. Grace saw it instantly. "You know it." He recovered fast. "I know half the delivery companies in this district. Then you know where to start. Keller looked at the receipt but still did not touch the phone. You wrote all that down after seeing it in the rain. I am an emergency room nurse, Grace said. I notice details when someone is trying not to die. The room went still again, deeper this time. The man in the wool coat lowered his tablet. The person on the bench stopped scrolling. Grace leaned forward just enough for Keller to hear the control beneath her exhaustion. Maddie Collins has asthma. If she is scared, if she is cold, if she does not have her inhaler, minutes matter. Keller's jaw shifted. That medical information is private. Grace almost smiled, but there was no humor in it. Now privacy concerns you. The words landed clean. Even the young officer near the hallway looked at Keller then. Keller's pride, cornered by facts, reached for procedure again. I need to verify your employment at Mercy General before I act on medical claims. Grace stared at him, rainwater still dripping from her sleeve. You can verify me while a patrol car verifies Bay 17. He did not answer. The clock clicked to 10:48. Grace heard it like a door closing. She turned from Keller and looked toward the hallway behind the desk. Detective Bennett, she called, not screaming, but loud enough to travel. Keller's hand slammed lightly against the counter, more sound than force. That is enough. Grace did not look away from the hallway. East River Storage. Bay 17. Maddie Collins. White van. Broken left tail light. Keller came around the side of the desk, face flushed with anger and embarrassment. You do not get to take over my station. Grace stood her ground, hands open, voice steady. I am not trying to take over your station. I am trying to get one child out of one van before your pride buries the lead. The young officer took a half step forward, then stopped. The dispatcher finally lifted her head. A door opened somewhere down the hall. Footsteps approached, quick and firm. Keller turned toward the sound, irritation still on his face, but Grace saw his confidence weaken before he did. Detective Laura Bennett stepped into the lobby wearing a dark raincoat, her hair damp, her eyes red from searching too long. Who said Maddie Collins? She asked. The station froze. Grace pointed to the tray beside Keller's keyboard. I did, she said. And I brought her bracelet. Detective Laura Bennett crossed the lobby so quickly that the room seemed to part around her. Rain clung to the shoulders of her dark coat, and exhaustion sat under her eyes, but the moment she saw the purple bracelet in the tray, everything about her sharpened. Keller reached for it first, perhaps from habit, perhaps from the sudden need to look useful, but Bennett's voice stopped him cold. Do not touch it again. The station went quiet enough to hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Keller's hand froze above the tray. Bennett pulled a pair of gloves from her coat pocket, slipped them on, and lifted the bracelet with a care that made Grace's throat tighten. Purple silicone. Silver charm. Brave girl. Bennett turned it beneath the desk lamp, and the hard professional mask on her face cracked for half a second. Where did you get this? She asked. Keller answered before Grace could. She claims she found it near East River Storage. Bennett did not look at him. Her eyes stayed on Grace. Where exactly? Grace stepped closer, every detail rising clean and bright now that someone had finally asked the right question. East River Storage. Bay 17. White van parked near the side fence. Broken left tail light. Mud on the rear bumper. Ward Logistics sticker on the back window. I saw Maddie in the rear side window for maybe 1 second. She pressed her hand to the glass, then the van moved. The bracelet fell near the curb. Bennett's face changed with each detail, not into disbelief, but into recognition. She turned toward the young officer by the hallway. Get patrol units to East River Storage now. Quiet approach. No sirens until they confirm the van. Tell dispatch to pull traffic cameras from East River Avenue between 10:15 and 10:45. I want every white van with a broken left taillight flagged. The young officer moved at once. Radios crackled alive behind the glass. A dispatcher began repeating the location. The station, which had felt frozen moments earlier, suddenly filled with purposeful motion. Grace stood still in the center of it, wet, tired, and almost dizzy from the relief of being believed too late. Keller looked from Bennett to Grace, confusion and dread rising together in his face. "Detective, how do you know it is hers?" Bennett finally turned to him. "Because the bracelet was not released to the public." The words landed like the sound of a door locking behind him. Keller's mouth opened, but no explanation came out. Bennett held the bracelet up slightly. "Her father gave it to her before he passed. Her mother described it during the first interview. Brave girl. Purple band. Silver charm." Grace closed her eyes for 1 second. She saw Maddie in the hospital bed again, small fingers gripping that charm while she fought for breath. When she opened her eyes, Bennett was looking at her differently now, not as a walk-in tip, not as a disturbance, but as the person who had carried the missing piece through the rain while the room refused to see it. "You said you are a nurse?" Bennett asked. "Emergency room. Mercy General. And you treated Maddie?" Grace nodded. 3 months ago. Severe asthma attack." Bennett's jaw tightened. "Then you may have recognized her faster than anyone else could have." Keller shifted beside the desk, smaller now under the same white lights that had made him look so certain minutes before. "I was going to verify," he said, but even he seemed to hear how thin it sounded. Grace looked at him. No anger rose in her face. Only exhaustion, and something sadder than anger. "You had enough to send one car." That was all she said. It was worse than shouting. Bennett placed the bracelet into an evidence envelope and sealed it, writing the time across the label with firm strokes. 10:50, Grace saw the number and felt the lost minutes press against her ribs. The radio answered from somewhere beyond the front desk. Unit 3 responding to East River Storage. 2 minutes out. Another voice followed. Traffic camera has a white van matching description turning off East River at 10:31. Bennett looked up sharply. Direction. A pause. Static. Then, toward the storage complex. Left rear light appears damaged. Keller's face drained of color. The man in the wool coat lowered himself slowly onto the bench as if his legs had forgotten what to do. Marisol was not here, no airport, no cameras, no crowd of travelers, only a precinct lobby at night and one truth becoming undeniable under cheap fluorescent light. Grace wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how cold she was. Bennett noticed. "Get her a blanket," she told someone, then turned back to Grace. "Miss Miller, I need you to stay with me. Every detail matters now." Grace nodded, but her eyes went to the clock. 10:51, time had not forgiven them. It never did. Somewhere across town, a white van sat near Bay 17, and a little girl who had once worn a bracelet to feel brave was still waiting for adults to prove the word meant something. Grace sat beneath the buzzing lights with a gray station blanket around her shoulders, but the cold had already moved deeper than her skin. It was not the rain anymore. It was the knowledge of 10:42, 10:43, 10:44, every wasted minute now standing in the lobby like witnesses no one could dismiss. Detective Bennett crouched in front of her with a notepad balanced on one knee, speaking gently but quickly. "Start from the moment you left the hospital." Grace nodded, fingers wrapped around a paper cup of water someone had placed in her hands. "I left Mercy General at 10:07. I took East River Avenue because the bridge ramp was closed. I stopped for gas at 10:18. When I pulled out, I saw the van by the storage fence. It was not parked straight. It was angled like someone had stopped in a hurry." Bennett wrote without looking away for long. "Did you see the driver?" Grace closed her eyes, reaching back through rain and windshield glare. White male. Late 40s, maybe. Baseball cap. Delivery jacket. I saw him in the side mirror when he walked around the van. He looked calm. Too calm. Across the lobby, Keller stood beside the front desk, silent now, no longer touching the tray where the bracelet had been. He listened to every detail he had refused minutes earlier, and each one seemed to remove another brick from the wall he had built between Grace and the truth. The radio crackled again. Unit 3 approaching East River Storage. Lights off. Visual on Bay 17. The room stopped breathing. Even the printer seemed to fall quiet between pages. Bennett raised her radio. Unit 3, confirm van. Static came first, thin and sharp. Then a voice answered, low. White van present. Left rear tail light damaged. Ward logistics sticker confirmed. Grace's hand tightened around the cup until the rim bent. Bennett looked at her once, then back toward the radio. Any sign of the child? A pause. Rain hissed faintly through the station windows. Grace heard her own heartbeat, slow and heavy, like footsteps in a hallway. Stand by, the unit replied. Those two words filled the lobby with helplessness. Grace stared at the sealed evidence envelope on Bennett's desk. The bracelet was inside now, protected, labeled, believed. But belief had arrived after Maddie had already been carried deeper into danger. Grace thought of the child's asthma, the way panic could narrow the body into a locked room, the way breath could become work. She pulled the blanket tighter and whispered, not to anyone, come on, brave girl. Keller heard it. His face changed. Not dramatically. Not enough for forgiveness. Just enough to show the words had reached him somewhere procedure could not. The radio burst again. Movement inside Bay 17. Requesting child welfare unit and medical standby. Bennett stood at once. Confirmed child. Another pause, shorter this time. Possible. Small figure visible through office window at rear of unit. Grace rose before she realized she was moving. The blanket slipped from one shoulder. Keller stepped forward out of instinct, then stopped himself, as if remembering that blocking her had already cost enough. Bennett turned to Grace. We have officers there. You did your part. Grace shook her head. Her eyes were wet, but her voice held. No. My part is not over until she is breathing safely. Bennett studied her, then nodded once, understanding not the rulebook, but the nurse in front of her. She pointed to the young officer. Have rescue stage 2 blocks out. Tell them the child has a history of severe asthma. Northwest sirens close to the unit unless necessary. The young officer related immediately. Grace looked at Keller then. He could barely meet her eyes. The station around them had transformed from dull routine into focused urgency, and the only thing that had changed was that someone finally listened to the black woman he had told to sit down. The radio came alive one more time. We have the child. Conscious. Scared. Breathing fast. Request medical now. Grace covered her mouth with one hand, not to hide a sob, but to hold herself together. Bennett closed her eyes for half a second, then opened them with command restored. Get her to Mercy General. Tell them Grace Miller knows her history. Keller whispered, almost too low to hear, she was right. Grace looked at him across the lobby, rain drying on her sleeves, exhaustion carved into her face, dignity still standing. Where his doubt had tried to push it down. No, she said softly. Maddie was real. That should have been enough. The words left Grace's mouth softly, but they struck Officer Keller harder than any accusation could have. Maddie was real. That should have been enough. No one in the lobby moved for a moment. The radio kept crackling with updates from East River Storage, but the station itself seemed to have gone inward, forced to sit with what had almost happened inside its own walls. Keller looked at the front desk, at the chair where he had told Grace to wait, at the tray where the bracelet had sat while his pride sorted urgency into inconvenience. His badge still shone beneath the fluorescent lights, but now it looked less like authority and more like a question he did not know how to answer. Detective Bennett was already moving, giving instructions with a calm intensity that filled the room. Notify Mercy General. Pediatric respiratory team on standby. Contact Erin Collins and have an officer bring her through the side entrance. No media, no crowd. The young officer repeated the orders into his radio. Grace stepped toward the desk, her blanket slipping lower, her eyes fixed on Bennett. I can meet them at the hospital. Maddie knows me. If she wakes scared, a familiar voice might help. Bennett did not hesitate the way Keller had. She looked at Grace's soaked shoes, the exhaustion under her eyes, the steadiness still holding her upright, and nodded. I will arrange transport. That simple sentence, spoken without suspicion, nearly broke Grace more than Keller's dismissal had. To be believed after fighting for belief felt like stepping into warmth too quickly after standing in the cold. Keller cleared his throat. Detective, I can drive her. Bennett turned slowly. So did Grace. Keller's face tightened, but he did not look away this time. I delayed the response, he said. I can at least help get her where she needs to be. Bennett studied him, measuring whether this was guilt trying to look useful or responsibility finally learning its own weight. You will not speak over her, she said. You will not question her. You will get her to Mercy General, and then you will write down exactly what happened here. Keller nodded. Yes, Detective. Grace looked at him for a long second. She did not forgive him. Not there. Not because he had suddenly found the right tone after the damage was done. But Maddie was on her way to the hospital, and Grace knew the difference between justice and distraction. Then get the car, she said. Keller moved at once. Outside, the rain had softened into a mist that clung to the patrol car windows and blurred the streetlights into pale gold halos. Grace sat in the passenger seat with the gray blanket around her shoulders, watching the precinct shrink behind them as Keller pulled into the wet street. For the first mile, neither spoke. The radio gave quiet updates. Maddie was conscious. Breathing fast but stable. Rescue was 5 minutes from Mercy General. Aaron Collins had been notified. Grace closed her eyes and let the words pass through her like medicine entering a vein. Stable did not mean safe. Not yet. But it meant alive. Keller kept both hands on the wheel. His voice came low, almost swallowed by the wipers. I thought you were exaggerating. Grace opened her eyes and looked at the rain moving across the windshield. No, she said. You thought I was easy to ignore. The sentence filled the car completely. Keller did not defend himself. That was the first honest thing he had done all night. I did, he said. His admission sat between them, ugly and necessary. Grace turned her head slightly, studying him in the dashboard glow. Without the desk, without the lobby, without people watching him perform certainty, he looked tired in a different way. Not from the shift. From seeing himself. People come into emergency rooms scared, angry, confused, messy, Grace said. Sometimes they smell like rain. Sometimes they cannot explain things cleanly. Sometimes they look like the kind of person someone already decided not to hear. But if I treated them the way you treated me, people would die. Keller's jaw tightened. He nodded once, small and slow. I know. No, Grace said, not unkindly. You are starting to know. Ahead, the red glow of Mercy General appeared through the mist, emergency. Entrance lights reflecting off the wet pavement. An ambulance pulled in just before them. Grace leaned forward, and for the first time all night, her breathing changed. Not relief. Readiness. Keller stopped the car near the entrance. Before he could speak, Grace opened the door and stepped into the rain. Then she turned back once. Write the truth, she said. Not the version that protects you. Keller looked at her, then down at the badge on his chest. I will. Grace did not wait to see if the promise sounded convincing. She was already moving toward the ambulance doors, toward the child who had once worn a bracelet to feel brave, toward the work that had never needed permission to matter. Grace reached the ambulance doors just as the paramedics guided Maddie Collins into the emergency entrance. The girl looked smaller than Grace remembered, wrapped in a pale blanket, hair damp at the edges, eyes half open beneath the harsh lights of Mercy General. A clear oxygen mask rested over her nose and mouth, fogging faintly with each quick breath. Grace slowed before stepping close, because even rescue could feel frightening when too many adults moved too fast. Maddie, she said gently. The girl's eyes shifted toward the sound. For a moment, confusion clouded them. Then recognition flickered, fragile but real. Grace leaned into the light where Maddie could see her face. It is Nurse Grace. You are at Mercy General. You are safe. Maddie's fingers moved weakly against the blanket, searching for something that was not there. Grace knew before anyone asked. Your bracelet is safe, she said. Detective Bennett has it. Brave girl made it all the way back. Maddie's eyes filled, but her breathing eased by the smallest measure. Small things mattered in medicine. One familiar voice. One honest sentence. One less fear for the body to carry. Aaron Collins arrived moments later through the side entrance, escorted by an officer who had the decency to step back and let a mother reach her child without interruption. Aaron stopped when she saw Maddie, one hand flying to her mouth, the other gripping the doorway as if the world had tilted. Grace moved aside. Maddie turned her head. And the sound that left Aaron was not a scream, not even a word. It was the broken breath of someone who had been holding grief away with both hands and suddenly found hope standing in front of her. She crossed the room and took Maddie's hand, careful around the monitor wires and blanket. "I am here," Aaron whispered. "Mommy is here." Grace stepped back into the hallway, letting the reunion belong to them. The hospital moved around her with its familiar rhythm, nurses calling room numbers, carts rolling over tile, monitors beeping in uneven patterns, rain ticking softly against the ambulance bay doors. Officer Keller stood near the entrance, hat in his hands, watching through the glass but not entering. His face carried shame now without asking anyone to remove it. Detective Bennett arrived a few minutes later, holding the sealed evidence envelope. Through the window, she showed Maddie the purple bracelet before placing it safely with the case file. Aaron looked at Grace, and no formal thank you could have carried what her eyes did. Still, she came into the hallway and took Grace's hands. "You remembered her," Aaron said. Grace felt the sentence settle deeper than praise. She made herself easy to remember. Aaron squeezed her hands. "They told me you would not leave until someone listened." Grace looked toward Keller. He lowered his eyes. "I could not leave," she said. "Not after seeing her." Keller stepped forward then, stopping several feet away, careful with the distance this time. "Miss Miller," he said, voice low, "I wrote the report. The full report. I included that you gave the location, the van description, the bracelet, and Maddie's medical history before I acted." Grace studied him. "And why you did not act?" The question made his jaw tighten, but he did not look away. "Yes," he said. "I wrote that too." Bennett glanced at him, then at Grace. Something quiet passed between the three of them, not forgiveness, not closure, but accountability finally entering the room. Keller looked through the glass at Maddie and her mother, then back at Grace. "I am sorry," he said. "Not because I was embarrassed. Not because I got caught being wrong. Because a child waited longer than she should have, and you had to fight to be believed." Grace let the words stand. She did not rush to comfort him. She did not punish him either. The night had already carried enough weight. "Then let this change what you do next time," she said. Keller nodded. "It will." In Maddie's room, the girl lifted one hand weakly toward the window. Grace smiled and lifted her hand back. The gesture was small, almost invisible beneath the hospital lights, but it carried the whole night inside it: the rain, the bracelet, the station, the ticking clock, the refusal to sit quietly while truth was being delayed. Grace leaned against the wall at last, exhausted down to her bones, but still standing. Kindness had not made her soft. It had made her impossible to move when a child needed her. By 1:13 in the morning, the rain had finally stopped. Mercy General Hospital settled into that strange hour when the lights stayed bright but the world outside looked washed clean and empty, as if the city itself had gone quiet to listen. Grace stood near the nurse's station with a dry blanket around her shoulders and a warm paper cup of tea cooling between her hands. Through the glass of room 12, Maddie Collins slept with her mother beside her, their hands linked on top of the blanket. The oxygen mask was gone now, replaced by a small nasal tube, and every steady rise of Maddie's chest felt like an answer to the clock that had tried to take her away. Detective Bennett came down the hallway with the purple bracelet sealed in a clear evidence pouch. She stopped beside Grace and held it up gently, not as a trophy, not as proof that anyone had won, but as a reminder that the smallest thing in the room had been the loudest truth. "They found the van at Bay 17, Bennett said. "The driver is in custody. Maddie is safe. Because you came in." Grace looked through the glass at the sleeping child. "Because someone finally listened." Bennett nodded, accepting the correction. A few feet away, Officer Keller stood with his hat in both hands. He had changed since the station, not enough to erase what happened, but enough to know he could not hide behind the desk anymore. "Miss Miller," he said quietly. Grace turned. He looked tired under the hospital lights, but this time the tiredness did not make him cruel. It made him honest. My report is filed. Detective Bennett has a copy. Internal review will have one by morning. I wrote that you gave me the location, the vehicle, the bracelet, the medical risk, and that I failed to act with the urgency required. His voice thinned, but he did not look away. I also wrote why. Grace studied him for a long moment. Behind him, nurses moved past with clipboards and medication carts. Life continued because people kept doing the work after the apology. Do not write it only because you regret tonight, she said. Write it so the next person who comes in wet, scared, tired, and black does not have to prove they are worth hearing. Keller lowered his head. I understand. Grace's eyes did not soften quickly. No, she said. You are learning. Understanding takes longer. Keller accepted that. For once, he did not defend himself. That silence mattered. It was not the silence of dismissal anymore. It was the silence of a man letting the truth stay uncomfortable. Erin Collins stepped out of Maddie's room then, her face swollen from crying but steadier now. She walked straight to Grace and wrapped both arms around her. Grace held her gently, feeling the woman shake once before breathing out. She told me, Erin whispered. She said she heard your voice and knew she was home. Grace closed her eyes. For all the reports, radios, badges, and procedures in the world, that sentence was the only reward she needed. When Erin stepped back, she placed one hand over Grace's. Thank you for not letting them make you sit down. Grace gave a small, tired smile. I did sit down, she said. I just did not stay there. Later, as dawn began thinning the dark behind the hospital windows, Grace walked out through the emergency entrance. The pavement was wet, shining under the streetlights like black glass. Keller stood near his patrol car, not blocking her path, not asking for forgiveness, only present enough to say the final thing without making it about himself. Next time, he said, I listen before the clock runs out. Grace paused beside him. The air smelled of rain, exhaust, and the first bitter coffee of morning. Make sure there is a next time, she said. For someone else. Then she stepped off the curb and walked toward her car, her hospital shoes still damp, her body exhausted, her heart heavy but unbroken. Behind her, Mercy General glowed with steady light. Inside, a little girl slept safely beside her mother, a purple bracelet waiting to return to her wrist when the case allowed it. At the station, a desk would look different in the morning to the men who had hidden behind it. And somewhere in the quiet between night and sunrise, the lesson remained simple enough for anyone to understand: kindness is not weakness, urgency is not attitude, and no one should have to look powerful before they are believed. So the question is this: how many truths have been delayed, dismissed, or lost simply because the person telling them did not look like someone the world was ready to hear?